Welcome to our deep dive, this time into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
It's a pretty intense book.
It's a heavy hitter for sure.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to kind of dig into it with you because it's not just some psychological theory. It's straight from Frankl's own experience in the Nazi concentration camps during World War II.
That's what is so powerful about this book, I think, is that it's not just an account from someone who's looking from the outside trying to figure out what happened. Psychologically, this is someone who lived it firsthand.
Yeah.
And so when he talks about things like surviving, he knows what he's talking about because he did it.
Yeah.
He takes us right into Auschwitz with him and shows us the daily struggles and the dehumanization and just this constant fear of death.
Right.
But in the middle of that horror, he finds a way to not only survive, but to discover a meaning in it.
It's almost unbelievable, right? Like you wonder how...
You would think it would be impossible.
Yeah, like how is that even possible?
Mm.
But that's what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah.
So we're going to explore how Frankl saw the prisoners' mental reactions to camp life. And he puts them in these three fronts, and how clinging to meaning became a lifeline for a lot of them.
These are essential.
And then ultimately how that led him to develop his unique approach to therapy, which is called logotherapy.
And all of it, like you were saying, how is it even possible to find meaning in a place like that? It goes back to this great quote that he includes in this book by Nietzsche, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how.
That is.
And so
really...
by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only understand Frankl's ideas, but I think we can all learn how to apply them to our own lives and figure out how we can find meaning and resilience when times get tough.
For sure.
Which, for most of us, they do at some point or another.
Right, exactly. All right, so Frankl's book, it's split into two parts.
Okay.
The first part is his firsthand account of life in a concentration camp. And he starts by kind of breaking down this experience of the prisoners into three distinct phases.
Oh.
I mean, have you ever thought about what it would be like to just be suddenly thrown into this horrific situation?
It's unimaginable, really. The first phase that Frankl talks about is shock. And I think we can all relate to shock on some level.
Right.
But this is shock on a level that most of us will hopefully never experience.
Right.
And this is where you're just trying to grasp the reality of what's happening, right? He talks about when he first arrived at Auschwitz being stripped of everything, his identity, his possessions. He even talks about having his hair shaved, having to wear the same uniform as everyone else.
Right.
He sees firsthand the brutality of the guards and the desperation of the other prisoners just trying to survive.
Yeah, and he has this darkly humorous story about asking another prisoner for directions to his block, and the prisoner just replies, shit.
Just complete and utter despair.
Right. Like all normal human interactions just broken down.
Yeah.
And I think it's just this small detail, but it's like, wow. It just highlights the absurdity of the situation.
The absurdity and just the complete despair that must have been experienced in that moment.
Right.
And, you know, he compares it to a time when he had a near-fatal climbing accident where his strongest emotion was this kind of detached curiosity about whether he would live or die. So it was almost like in these moments, the mind is trying to make sense of something so big by just observing it.
Like from a distance.
Yes.
Interesting.
And then once the initial shock wears off, he says the prisoners enter the second phase.
Okay.
Apathy.
Apathy.
And this is where they kind of shut down emotionally as a way to just cope with this constant threat of death and the brutal conditions. It's a survival mechanism.
So they're just trying to get through the day.
Yeah, you have to find a way to get through the day.
Right.
And so he talks about how the prisoners would suppress their emotions, only focusing on doing what was necessary to survive and looking for any little comfort they could find. Almost becoming numb to the horror around them.
It reminds me of that that quote, one day at a time.
Yeah.
It's like that's all you can do.
That's all you can do.
In that situation.
And he actually talks about craving 5 minutes of solitude amidst all the chaos and finding this strange sense of peace near the tent where they kept the bodies of those who had died.
Wow.
Which is just this incredibly powerful image of how apathy can become a means of survival in a world where everything familiar has been stripped away.
Yeah. So you get through the shock, you go through this period of apathy, and then there's this third phase.
Yes. Depersonalization.
Depersonalization.
And this is interesting because this happens after they're liberated.
Yeah.
So it's like this delayed reaction
Oh, wow.
to all the trauma.
It's amazing how the mind works.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
And so this is where things get even more interesting because Frankl sees that so many of these prisoners are struggling to even understand their newfound freedom.
Right.
It felt unreal,
Yeah.
like a dream.
And they had so much trouble connecting with their emotions or even the outside world.
It's like they've almost been shaped so much that they can't go back to what was before.
Yeah. It's like they can't even comprehend what normal is anymore.
Right, exactly.
And throughout these 3 phases, Frankl keeps coming back to this point that finding meaning in even the most horrific situations is absolutely essential for survival.
Right.
It wasn't just a nice thing to have.
Yeah.
It was the thing that kept people alive.
And he gives so many examples of how these prisoners found meaning.
Yeah.
Like clinging to thoughts of loved ones.
Yeah.
Finding purpose in their work, however small or meaningless it seemed.
Yeah.
Or even just experiencing those brief moments of beauty, like a sunset.
Like a little glimpse of hope.
Yeah, it's like a little glimmer.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how the human spirit can find that hope in such darkness. He also shares the opposite, right? He shares the stories of those who gave up and who lost all hope.
Right.
And he noticed that they were often the first to die from disease or even despair.
Oh, wow.
There's a really poignant story that he tells about a prisoner who was holding on to hope for the future.
Right.
And when that hope was gone, he gave up on life and died very shortly after.
It's like that having something to live for, that why, can really make all the difference.
That's right.
And this all leads to the second part of Frankl's book where he lays out his theory of logotherapy.
Logotherapy.
Right. And this is centered around this idea that humans aren't just driven by pleasure or power,
right,
but we're driven by this will to meaning.
Yeah. Have you ever felt that kind of emptiness, like a lack of purpose?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's what Frankl calls the existential vacuum.
Right.
This feeling of emptiness and this lack of purpose.
Yeah, and it can show up in so many ways.
It can.
From like depression and anxiety to addiction, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And Frankl was saying this search for meaning is essential to being human.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as essential as needing food or shelter.
Yeah, so it's not just this...
It's not a luxury.
Right, it's not just a luxury.
It's not.
Yeah, and he goes on to explain, it's not about finding this one big universal meaning of life.
Right.
But it's about discovering the unique meaning that exists in each of our own lives and circumstances.
Yeah, so there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all answer for everyone.
Right.
It's about this personal journey of discovery.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and he didn't believe that this journey was about finding this perfect balance or lack of tension.
Okay.
He actually had a name for this tension. He called it no dynamics.
No dynamics.
Yeah, so it's this pull between the meaning that we're striving for and our efforts to achieve it.
Huh. So it's almost like
it's a constant
embracing that tension or that struggle.
Yeah, and he thought that a healthy life
Okay.
actually involves actively striving for something meaningful.
So it's not about just like sitting back and relaxing.
It's not.
Yeah.
No, and that's where logotherapy comes in.
Okay.
It offers these techniques to help us tap into our own will to meaning.
Okay.
And one of these is called paradoxical intention.
Paradoxical intention.
Yeah, and this is where you confront your fears head on by intending to do the very thing that you're afraid of.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, so like if you're afraid of public speaking, you would go out and give a speech.
Right, right.
And it sounds counterintuitive, but it's about facing your fear.
Yeah.
Instead of running from it.
Instead of hiding from it.
Yeah, Frankl gives this example of a doctor who cured his fear of sweating by forcing himself to sweat profusely in public.
Oh, wow. Like lean into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So by intending the very thing that he feared, he actually took away its power.
Wow. That's a powerful example.
It is.
Yeah.
It really shows how we can shift our perspective
Yeah.
and gain control over our fears.
It seems like a lot of his ideas have to do with perspective.
Perspective is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And another technique is called de-reflection.
Okay.
And this is where you shift your focus away from yourself and toward a meaningful goal.
Okay.
And this connects to this idea of self-transcendence.
Self-transcendence.
Yeah, so finding meaning outside of ourselves.
Right.
And Frankl really believed that true meaning often lies in connecting with something larger than ourselves.
So it's not all about me, me, me.
It's not all about you.
Yeah, it's about something bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether it's a cause or a creative pursuit or another human being.
It's like that saying, the
Yeah.
best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
And he shares this really interesting story about an elderly doctor who was grieving the loss of his wife.
Okay.
And instead of just offering comfort, Frankl actually asked him to imagine what would have happened if he had died first.
Oh, wow.
And the doctor realizes that by living, he had spared his wife from the pain of losing him.
Right.
And in that moment, he was able to find meaning in his own suffering.
Wow. That's such a powerful example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is logotherapy in action.
Yeah.
And it's not just about enduring hardship either.
Right.
Frankl believed that meaning could be found in every moment.
Right.
In those little joys as well as the big challenges.
Yeah. So I guess that brings us to the question for you.
Yeah.
Given what we've talked about with Frankl's emphasis on the search for meaning,
Right.
what are some steps that you can take to uncover or create more meaning in your own life?
Yeah.
What are you passionate about?
What gives you a sense of purpose?
It's something to think about as we continue our deep dive.
Yeah, it's something to really ponder because it's not an easy question to answer, but it's definitely an important one,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a question that'll really get you thinking, you know.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in everyday life and not really think about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. It's so easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day, and we kind of forget to ask ourselves these bigger questions about what it all means and what our purpose is.
Yeah.
You know, Frankl believed that meaning isn't something you just stumble upon.
Right.
You have to actively seek it out. You have to create it.
Yeah.
And he saw this creative process as being essential for us to flourish as humans,
Yeah.
even more important than pursuing happiness.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he actually thought that directly chasing after happiness was counterproductive.
Kind of like trying to catch smoke.
It is. The more you chase it, the further it slips away.
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually likened it to a butterfly. The more you chase it, the more it eludes you.
Right.
But if you turn your attention to other things, it might just land softly on your shoulder.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Frankl believed that meaning is often found in those other things.
Right.
Like in the challenges that we overcome, the contributions that we make, the love that we share.
Right. So shift your focus from the happiness to the meaningful life.
Yes. And the happiness might just find you along the way.
I like that.
Now,
All right.
Frankl also had some pretty interesting things to say about the psychology of the camp guards.
Yeah, it's like,
It's the question that kind of haunts us, right?
yeah, how could
people do this to other people?
how could human beings inflict such cruelty?
It's hard to understand.
Yeah.
And Frankl cautions against simple explanations.
Right.
He points out that, yeah, there were some guards who were just undeniably sadistic and brutal, but there were others who actually showed kindness and compassion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it wasn't just black and white.
Right.
He even tells the story about a guard who was known as the mass murderer of Steinhoff, who after the war actually ended up being a source of comfort and support to his fellow prisoners in a Soviet prison camp.
Whoa, that's a crazy.
It's a wild turn of events.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think about the complexity of human nature.
Right.
And Frankl was really adamant that we should never give up on anyone's capacity for change.
Right.
Even those who have committed truly terrible acts.
So while acknowledging the horrors
yes.
perpetrated by the guards,
Right.
he doesn't want to like demonize an entire group of people.
Absolutely not. And he still holds individuals accountable for their actions.
Right.
But this nuanced perspective, I think, is really reflected in his understanding of human nature as a whole.
Right.
He rejected this idea that we're just products of our environment or our biology.
Right.
He believed that even in the most extreme circumstances, we still have the freedom to choose how we respond.
And he has that famous quote, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So good.
And this freedom to choose our attitude is the foundation of human dignity.
Yeah.
And it's the key to finding meaning even in suffering.
Yeah. So it's like saying, okay, our circumstances might be out of our control,
Yeah.
but our response to them isn't.
Exactly.
And that is so powerful.
It is. We can choose to give in to despair.
Right.
Or we can choose to rise above it.
Rise above.
And that choice is what separates those who find meaning from those who are crushed by their experiences.
Let's talk about that moment of liberation.
Okay.
You would think it would be pure joy.
Yeah.
But he describes it as a very complex experience.
He does, yeah.
He talks about this feeling of depersonalization,
Yeah.
this sense of unreality, like, was this all a dream?
It was almost like they couldn't process it.
Right.
They had spent so long fantasizing about freedom
Right.
that when it finally came, it was almost unbelievable. Like their minds couldn't quite grasp the reality of the situation.
He describes how they were walking around in a daze, like almost afraid to believe it was true.
Yeah, they're hesitant.
Yeah.
And their bodies were also having to adjust. I mean, they were eating ravenously, their bodies craving nourishment after years of starvation.
Right.
They talked incessantly. It's like
Yeah.
they had to release years of pent-up thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, like reconnect with their bodies and their voices
Yes.
after so long.
After being silenced and dehumanized.
Yeah, and he observed that for some prisoners, this re-entry into the world was especially difficult.
It was.
Some had lost their families, their homes, their whole world.
Everything.
They came back, and there was no one waiting for them, no place to go,
Yeah.
and they really struggled to find a reason to keep going.
It's heartbreaking, but it highlights this enduring impact of trauma,
Yeah,
even after the immediate danger has passed.
yeah.
Yeah. But even in these moments of despair, Frankl still emphasizes the importance of finding meaning,
Right,
of choosing to live despite the pain.
right.
He talks about his own experience of returning to Vienna,
Right.
only to learn that his wife had died in the camps.
Yeah.
It was a devastating loss.
Oh.
But instead of just succumbing to grief,
Right,
he chose to find meaning in his work and in helping other people
right.
who were struggling with their own trauma.
That is really amazing.
It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
It is.
And, he didn't just talk about these ideas, he
Right.
lived them.
He did.
He could have easily given into despair after losing his entire family.
Right.
But he chose to rebuild his life and dedicate himself to helping other people.
Yeah, and that's where I think his concept of tragic optimism comes in.
Tragic optimism.
It's this idea of finding meaning and purpose even when faced with pain and guilt and death.
Yeah, those things that we all have to face at some point.
Right.
And he believed that these experiences, while difficult,
Right.
don't have to rob life of its meaning.
Right.
In fact, they can even be sources of growth and transformation.
Yeah, so it's not about pretending that bad things don't happen.
No.
It's not about ignoring suffering.
It's about acknowledging the darkness,
Mhm.
but still choosing to believe that life is worth living.
So how do we cultivate that?
Well, Frankl argued that one way to do that is to focus on what he called attitudinal values.
Attitudinal values.
Yeah, values that we can realize even in the most difficult situations.
So like courage, compassion, humor.
Yes, even a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
These are qualities that can't be taken away from us no matter what external challenges we face.
So they're like internal resources.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a well that we can tap into
Right.
to help us get through life's challenges.
Yeah. So even if we can't control what happens to us,
Right.
we can control how we react.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he stressed the importance of finding meaning in action,
Okay.
like doing something that contributes to the world.
Yeah. However small.
Yeah.
That's
He talks about the importance of self-transcendence.
self-transcendence.
Yeah, moving beyond our own self-interest and finding a purpose in something larger than ourselves.
And this could be anything
Yeah.
from like creative pursuit to social cause to just being present in our relationships.
Yeah, being a good friend, being a good parent,
Right.
all of those things.
So it's not about finding some big universal meaning.
Right.
It's about creating meaning in our own lives.
Yeah. Through our actions, our interactions with the world.
Right. And Frankl believed that this active creation of meaning was essential,
Yes.
not just for us as individuals,
Right.
but for society as a whole.
It's true. He argued that a society that just focuses on material wealth and achievement
Right.
is ultimately spiritually impoverished.
Yeah, like he was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In seeing that there was this potential for meaninglessness and this existential despair
Right.
that can come from a culture that's obsessed with success and consumption.
Yeah. And he offered logotherapy as an antidote.
Yeah, a way to help individuals reconnect with what really matters.
As we wrap this up, I think it's worth asking ourselves, like, what does Frankl's message mean for us today? How can we apply this to our own lives? Especially in this world that just feels so chaotic and overwhelming.
Especially now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be a lot to process.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to sometimes quiet the noise.
It is, but I think that's what makes Frankl's message so important for us today.
Yeah.
You know, he reminds us that even in the middle of all this uncertainty and all this suffering,
Right.
we still have that power to choose how we feel about it,
Yeah.
to choose our attitude and find meaning, and to create a life that is both purposeful and fulfilling.
Yeah, that idea of choosing your attitude, even when things are really hard,
Yeah,
it's so powerful.
it is.
It's like there's always something we can control,
Yeah,
even when it feels like everything's out of control.
absolutely. And remember those attitudinal values that we were talking about before, like courage and compassion and humor
Right, right.
and that sense of wonder. Those are things that nobody can take away from us, no
Yeah.
matter what's going on.
Right.
They're those internal resources that we can always tap into.
Like our own personal.
Yes, that we can draw from to navigate all the craziness.
Yeah, so even if we can't control what happens to us,
Right.
we can control how we react,
Absolutely.
which I think is such a simple idea,
It is a simple idea.
but so profound.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's not just about like internal strength and resilience.
Right.
Frankl also talked about the importance of taking action,
Yeah.
of actually doing things that contribute to the world around us.
Right, putting it into practice.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So what actions could you take like today
Yeah.
that would bring more meaning to your life?
That's a good question.
It could be something as simple as like reaching out to a friend who's having a tough time,
Yeah.
or volunteering in your community, or even just taking some time to work on a creative project.
Right.
It doesn't have to be some big grand gesture.
Yeah.
It's about those little things,
Yeah.
those everyday things,
Right, the small things.
those small things that connect us with something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and make a difference in the world.
Exactly.
I really like Frankl's message.
It's a powerful one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a call to action in this world that can feel so overwhelming.
It is a call to action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, you still have that power.
You do.
Yeah.
To create meaning.
To create meaning, to live a life that matters.
Yeah. Hmm.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive
Yeah, thanks for being here.
into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
It's a great book.
I hope you found it as insightful as we did.
Me too. Hopefully even inspiring.
Yeah, definitely inspiring.
Yeah.
And keep thinking about these ideas,
Yeah.
and how you can apply them to your own life.
Because the search for meaning, it's a journey.
Right.
It's not a destination.
It's not something you just arrive at.
No.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
And it's a journey worth taking. Absolutely.